Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired, hear success stories, and learn tips and principles for bringing out the best in everyone. And now here's your host and CEO of RU Global Impact, Deborah Rue.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Human Potential at Work. This is Deborah Rue. I'm the CEO of RU Global Impact, and I'm really excited about the conversation today. I don't see many people having the conversations that we're going to have today, so I'm really excited about having Lauren Presutti join us. She's the founder and psychotherapist at River Oaks Psychology, and she's actually taking these topics in a different way. She's taking the direction, she's handling it in different ways, which I think is very powerful and adds value to our community. So I'm going to start by having Lauren introduce herself and talk a little bit about what she does do, and then we'll get into the interview. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It's really a privilege to be here today. I love the work that you do, and I'm really honored to share a little bit about my story and my passion. So I grew up in Michigan in a small town in the Metro Detroit area. I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, a rare form, when I was 2 years old, and I started using my first wheelchair, a power wheelchair, when I was 5 years old. Growing up through elementary school, I never really saw myself as disabled. I didn't really understand disability identity. I was very fortunate to be in a small town bubble where I had a lot of friends and I was always very motivated and social. And then as I started getting older and I started thinking about high school and college and my life, I really was exposed to barriers for individuals affected by disabilities and the social stereotypes and the misconceptions and the ableism, and I became fascinated with that, fascinated with human psychology, social work, ideas of identity development, and then later expanded to minorities of all types. But living with muscular dystrophy, relying on caregivers and all types of accessible accommodations and feeling those microaggressions every day, that's what really motivated me to become a mental health therapist, specializing in families and individuals affected by disabilities. When I first started my practice, I thought that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to be that expert on the intersection of mental health and disability, because we don't see that anywhere. We don't see that in the community. When I was growing up, when I wanted to seek out counseling services, I spent the entire session educating the counselor on what a disability meant, what my life was like. The entire counseling experience for me was simply educating the therapist, because graduate training programs don't really teach on disability. We see a lot of training on, how to be effective for other minority groups, how to be effective as a therapist for different populations, but we often don't see that for disability. Disability is often left out of the conversation, and I really believe that it's backwards to me, because I feel like individuals with disabilities have to be some of the most resilient, the most creative, the strongest problem solvers, the ones that have to be empowered, that have to feel like they can self-advocate for their lives, that they can stand up and really have their voice heard and really ask for the conversations that they need to achieve inclusion. And yet we don't treat the mental health needs of this population. We almost view them as outsiders or individuals that are inspirational all the time, or that we want to see them as strong, the heroes. No thanks to journalism or media sources that portray individuals with disabilities as superheroes, the inspirational strong one that's overcoming everything. What happens when an individual with a disability has depression or anxiety? It becomes very uncomfortable for the world, and it's very difficult to be understood with a disability, let alone be understood as a person with a disability who's experiencing mental health symptoms. And so in my practice, I do specialize in that area. I have expanded to be a therapist treating a wide variety of individuals. I like to say that disability is only one aspect of my identity, and it's only one aspect of my clinical practice. But nonetheless, I also do a lot of speaking, a lot of writing, a lot of public work advocating for this population, and really being one of the only professionals that is cross-trained in both mental health and disability studies. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of who I am and where I come from.
And that is why I wanted to have you on the show, because actually I agree with everything that you said. My company is actually creating a nonprofit to work on identity. And I was thinking about it, but as I was thinking about it, I understand how important representation is. And so actually one of my colleagues, Lamondre Pugh, I should say Dr. Lamondre Pugh, who is also a person that is born with muscular dystrophy and has been in power wheelchair. I think he went into a power wheelchair in his teens, but it's very important that when we're talking about identity, I believe that really focus that a person, I'll say it like this, a person doesn't have to guess if you have a disability, because people can have disabilities and they're not visible. There's quite a few of those, but right. But there are so many issues associated with identity. I love how you're saying it. But I also want to tell you, and I know Lori and I have told you this story, and I've actually told my producer this story because it was very traumatic for my family. But I have a daughter. Many of the audiences know that I have a daughter with Down syndrome, and she has Down syndrome, so she's happy and joyful and gleeful all day long. No, she's not. She is a person, and she is like everybody else. Absolutely. And as my daughter was growing up, I did not realize this. I knew something was wrong, but my daughter she had a health condition that we did not know about, and I didn't understand this, but what I also didn't know is that my daughter was living with intense, and that was, we just did not know that. We found that out later. But so what I did was I saw that she was having problems, mental health problems, depression, anxiety, behavior issues. And so I thought, I'm going to go to your world. I'm going to take her to a counselor. And so I had such a hard time finding a counselor first. And then I found a counselor, and I was very upfront. I explained to the counselor that my daughter had Down syndrome, what we were walking. I didn't just appear in the room. We actually told the counselor what was going on. So we get to the counseling session, and a unique thing about my daughter, I think it's unique, even though it sometimes can be stressful. My daughter talks in riddles almost. So when my daughter, for example, is in pain, she will start talking about this old boyfriend and his, I won't use the word she uses, be blank girlfriend. And I know that my daughter is in pain. She doesn't like that I know that, but I know something's happening. But she has to engage with the rest of the world. She doesn't live with me. She lives in a supported apartment. And so the rest of the world needs to understand her language, not just me. But anyway, so I've taken her to counseling. And so the counselor starts with just telling her that she's here to protect her. It's confidential, things like that. But if she's going to hurt herself or hurt someone else, she would have to report it to the police. Just a little disclaimer. So without missing a beat, my daughter starts talking about her ex-husband that beat her, and she goes into this long yarn, and I just let her go. And then my daughter stops, and I look at the therapist and I said, that's why we're here. Something's going on with her, but everything that she just said actually didn't happen, which made my daughter mad. But this is how the therapist responded. Oh, I can't help you. Oh, I can't help you. So she took my money and she scooted us out the door. And it made me so sad that because my daughter has Down syndrome, we can't get counseling help. And it really broke my heart a little. Now, we wound up later, Lauren. No, it shouldn't be that way. And later we realized Sarah was deathly ill. She almost died. Okay. But still, I still haven't taken my daughter into counseling, even though I think it would be beautiful. I think you also do coaching. I would love for my daughter to get coaching. But when the therapists don't even understand, like you said, what it means to have a lived experience with disabilities, it doesn't mean you're broken. It just means
absolutely not.
Experiences. Yeah.
And I think a lot of times counselors will make assumptions, and they have so much bias, and the assumptions can be so widespread. One assumption might be, Oh, obviously they're seeking counseling because they're angry about their disability. They may be seeking counseling for a reason that has nothing to do with their disability. Or maybe they assume that they're here because they're sad or they're depressed about barriers and limitations. That's not necessarily true. Most people with disabilities are very well adjusted, and they may be struggling with disability related things, but they also may not be. And so we really need to have therapists that understand the disability as a natural human difference, a natural part of humanity. That's not this internal or physical deficit that needs to be fixed or cured. I think there's a place for research and treatment. Where is the social model of disability in the counseling field? We don't often see that. I don't think that many therapists would even understand terms like medical model of disability versus social model of disability. If I ask them to give me some examples of ableism, I don't know if some of my colleagues in the counseling field would really understand what ableism is. There can be a lot of shortcomings.
I agree. And I also think, Lauren, that actually your lived experiences and your education and all of the experiences, your work experiences, makes you a better counselor for people that don't have disabilities as well. Just because the reality is, when we've had opportunities in life to learn and grow, all of us are going to walk a bunch of crap. It's just part of being alive. I believe we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And for example, just as a mom, having a daughter that's so sick and so much pain in the hospital, it was so hard for me, but it wasn't about me. It was about my daughter, but still, it was about me. I lived in the hospital with her because I wasn't going to leave her in the hospital by herself. So I stayed in the hospital with her for weeks upon weeks. And when we'd go out, then we would go back, and I don't care. It's my daughter. Too bad. Nothing else is more important. But it is really, it's just really a shame that society doesn't, well, in the first place, society disables people. People have all kind of physical and mental, and we're made up of so many different things, and we shift and change as we live. But it's a blessing that you grew up in Michigan in a small town where people could see. They weren't going to get caught up in your disability. And also, I imagine some of your peers might have been a little jealous of your power wheelchair because you were able to navigate and get around. Because children are fascinated with this,
yeah,
right?
And in elementary school, despite what you might think, I was very popular.
Oh, no, I bet you
I
were.
was very outgoing, very social, and it really wasn't until I went to college that I started learning about these things. And contrary to limitations and barriers, I was really fortunate, and I was actually able to study abroad 4 times in college. And so on those study abroad trips, where of course I had to bring a couple caregivers with me that were other students traveling with me, but when I made it on those trips and I went on those experiences, I learned so much about myself as an individual with a disability, as a woman with a disability, from the different diversity perspectives, from having to explain my needs to everyone around me all the time, learning to survive in different types of social settings or academic settings or employment settings abroad and in the United States back in Michigan. I really had to learn how to advocate for myself and how to speak up. And I do think that all of those experiences have instilled with me flexibility, resourcefulness, adaptation, right? Individuals with disabilities are some of the most innovative, some of the most adaptive, resourceful problem solvers, which make them extremely employable despite what people may think. Yeah, as I'm thinking about all the skills that I've learned from having muscular dystrophy and overcoming these barriers, I realized that I'm not only an effective therapist for individuals with disabilities, but also without, because they're really not that different. People with disabilities are really not that different from the general population. So I feel so honored to be able to work with both individuals with disabilities and without. I think sometimes individuals without disabilities that come to me walk away learning a little bit more about how normal people with disabilities can be. Of course, I have some clients that question my wheelchair, and I'm very transparent, and I say, yes, I use a wheelchair. Ask me any questions that you may have. I'm an open book. I'd love to talk about it if you have a question. But most of the time, they might have 1 or 2 questions, and then they think, oh, Lauren's normal, it's fine, this isn't weird. And I hope that they walk away from my counseling experience having a little bit greater insight on the capabilities and the qualities of individuals with disabilities.
Very well said, Lauren. And the reality is you were a trailblazer. And it's sad to say that, even though it's great to be a trailblazer, but in 2001, that we still are, 2021, sorry, that we still are treating people with disabilities. There's some other species that they're broken, or it's just ridiculous. And I know that right now we are trying to figure this out as a community across the world. And of course, the way we're experiencing this, it's very interesting that depending upon where you live, and not even where you live in the States or where you live in Bangladesh, or it also impacts you because society believes different things about individuals with disabilities. And so I know that this is also a time where we're rethinking every single thing about society, thank goodness. But I know very few people that have disabilities that are in your field. I'm sure there are, because a lot of people might have, and this is another reason why we're talking about it from the nonprofit I'm building, because it really is time for us all to embrace our lived experiences. I am so many different things. I'm a mother, but I'm also a mother of a daughter that was born with Down syndrome. And that's a little different from being a mother of this amazing son that I have that doesn't have disabilities. But as you said, Lauren, my son was impacted, I believe, mainly positively by having a sister with special needs. But at the same time, my son might feel at times that he didn't get as much of attention from his parents because we were spending a little bit more time with his sister. And we actually had some innovative guidance counselors during their school years that would sometimes try to address some of these issues. But it feels like it's almost always an afterthought. And so I think that's once again why your work is so important, and that you're not just going to look at it from your work and the clients you serve and the people you coach, but you're also trying to help the rest of the profession. Because during COVID-19, I've heard horrible estimates, 60% of Americans are going to have PTSD. And as a counselor, that PTSD is very interesting. It might not come on, it might not really show its ugly head for years, and then all of a sudden you start having it. And we've learned this with our military people that have had PTSD, but anybody can get PTSD. Yeah, anybody can. And
going back to one of your points about like different areas of the world, when I was in South Africa, I always made a point to interact with individuals with disabilities. When I was in Australia, I made a point to interact with individuals with disabilities and disability organizations. Japan and Ireland as well. Those were my 4 study abroad programs. And I was astounded at the variations and the differences and just the different perspectives with their identities and internalized ableism and the ways in which they navigate resources. And so it definitely gave me a great deal of perspective. Yeah, and then as you said again also about educating my colleagues in the field, that's what motivates me to be a speaker and to be an educator and to provide training for other counselors and to write articles on these subjects. I'm always looking for ways to explain to some of my colleagues on what they're dealing with. And I've had a great number of professionals come to me saying, I'm working with someone with a disability. I feel so stuck, Lauren. I don't know what to do. They feel so comfortable with me. I don't want to refer them, but I need help. And so I've worked with a lot of other colleagues and professionals providing insight on, no kidding, they feel understood or misunderstood. This is why. Or they're probably not opening up to you about this because your approach is like this, or different things like that. I've really enjoyed not only being a counselor, but also being an educator as well.
I agree. I want to get your comment on something. One time I said to Lamondre, and I meant it positively. I said, Lamondre, I said this to him a couple of years ago. I said, I don't even see your disability. I don't even see it. And I meant it as a compliment because there's so many things he is. And so he said, Deborah, I want you to see all of me. And I am a person with a disability. So when you say, and I understand you're saying that out of love, but He said, I'm an African American man, and I want you to see I'm a man of color. I want you to know that. But I meant it. I meant it in my own heart. I meant it in a positive way. But he said, no, I want you to see all of me. And he's been a great teacher to me. He's always teaching me, just like we are to each other. We're all learning from each other. But somehow society's gotten stuck when it comes to people with disabilities, especially people with visible disabilities. Now, people that have invisible disabilities, society will decide, oh, they're acting out, or my gosh, could you be a better parent? Your child is out of control. And I think there's also a lot of problems with invisible disabilities. Yeah, and what we do is we blame the parents and the individuals rather than seeking to understand who we are. Yeah, and so there's a lot of problems with all these different parts of the conversation, including, I want to say one more thing, Lauren, including people saying if you don't have a visible disability, you're not disabled, which I disagree with, because we have defined what it means to have a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act and under the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And so I think that I see sometimes people with physical disabilities actually attacking people with invisible disabilities like they don't belong at the table. So it's very confusing and messy as we move forward, but I just wanted to throw those hard topics to you.
Yeah, no, these are highly complex topics. We have competition in the disabled world. Some individuals with disabilities are claiming to be more or less disabled than other individuals, and I just don't think that's healthy for anyone. I don't think that individuals with physical disabilities should be saying that they're more disabled than individuals with invisible disabilities or those with chronic illnesses, because individuals with invisible disabilities absolutely need to be part of these conversations. Their stories are what's falling through the cracks. Their stories are not getting shown in the media or on talk shows like this. They're not in the public eye, and I think we really need to bring those with chronic illnesses and invisible disabilities to the forefront as well. For the comment that you made, I absolutely recognize and understand completely. That was coming from a very good place of your heart. And so as an individual with a disability, I never become mad or upset with people that are coming from a good place in their heart. I don't ever talk about my disability with the intention to make anybody without a disability feel guilty or shamed or anything like that. That is only dividing a further wedge between me and that person. I think that the argument for I want you to see my disability is absolutely valid, though. And I would agree with him that we don't want to be colorblind. We don't want to be blinded to minorities. We don't want to be blinded to people of color. We also don't want to be blinded to the lived experiences of someone with a disability. Growing up, like in middle school or high school, before I really became aware of these things, I had friends as well that would say that they didn't see my wheelchair, and that was fine to me. But then there were also experiences where they would invite me somewhere that was totally not accessible and not even act like it was an issue because they didn't consider my disability. Or they would invite me somewhere where there was stairs and it wouldn't even cross their mind that I wouldn't be able to go there. Or they would invite me to people's homes but not offer a way to have a ramp or anything like that. And it was almost dismissive of my reality because I felt more invisible and almost like they weren't recognizing my lived experience and my truth. And I think that was a little bit damaging. So I think, the argument for, no, I want you to see my disability. I want you to say that I'm a disabled person. I want you to see that part of me is an opportunity to bring disability into the conversation and normalize it. I think our society views disability as a bad thing, but that's a social construct. Why do we view disability as a sad, bad thing that we need to have pity over? It's because it's been formed that way because of history of disability and not being comfortable with disability. People in general are very uncomfortable around disability. Unless I'm going to be outgoing and make jokes about it and ease their discomfort, Nobody wants to hang out with me at a party. They're going to feel awkward. They're not going to know what I can or can't do. Should they high five me? Should they not? They're not really aware of the things that I can and can't do. And they're not shying away because they inherently don't like me, but they're shying away because they don't understand and they don't want to say something that's offensive or say something awkward, but I welcome it, and I think that we need to talk about it. We need to be open. We need to have conversations between those with disabilities and without so that we can say, we're not talking about this to make anyone feel ashamed. I'm not having these conversations to make the individual with a disability feel a sense of shame or the person without a disability feel a sense of shame. That's only going to divide us further apart. We need to talk about them openly and say, yeah, I love that statement that you don't see my wheelchair. I love that you see me as a good friend and not considerate. However, let me just open your mind to the fact that if you don't see that part of me, it's like you're erasing this identity. I can't choose when I have a disability. It's not this thing I carry around with me some days, but not other days. I don't get to cherry pick when I have a disability and when I don't. It's ingrained in my identity. It's a firm part of my core beliefs and values, and it's what makes me who I am. I don't want to have a disability. I don't wish to have a disability, but I have one, and that's not going to change. So we might as well be authentic in who we are and develop deeper connections with people. And that can only happen if we reach that mutual understanding and see each other for who we really are.
And I just wanted to say to the audience, I think you understand why Lauren's on the program now. I also am hoping, Lauren, that you'll do a master class for our new nonprofit about identity, because what you're doing is really incredible. And what we need to do is, all of us that are part of this community, we need to make sure that we are supporting Lauren so she can be even more successful. But Lauren, I want to go a little different direction. What would you say to employers? Because once again, she's telling you she's a speaker, so she's available to speak. I know I'm going to recommend her for speaking engagements. And once again, we need to pay Lauren for speaking engagements, because another thing that we do with the community, people with disabilities, is just assume that Lauren's just so glad to get out there. Lauren's a professional speaker. She needs to be paid for her work. So just want to say that. We've talked about that quite a bit on the show. So do you want to comment on that? And I'll let you comment.
Absolutely. Yeah. We can't minimize people with disabilities in business. We can't minimize their experiences. There are over 1 billion people in the world with some type of disability, and that does not even include their family members and all their friends and loved ones. There is no guarantee that you won't have a disability at some point in your life. It's the only minority group that anybody can join at any time. You can acquire a disability. It does not make sense for businesses to be designed and for community buildings to be designed without disability in mind. It just does not make sense to me. You never know if you're going to injure your leg, you're going to need to use a wheelchair for a little bit. It just doesn't make sense. Universal design is really important to me. I talk with a lot of businesses, a lot of organizations about what universal design is, why it's so important, and how we can get buy-in from investors and employers, and how we can actually make progress, and how we can explain to communities why disability education needs to be incorporated into elementary schools, why we need to have community organizations that actually foster inclusiveness, and what does inclusiveness really look like, and how can we actually carry that out. And all of these topics are important to me. How can we possibly have a sustainable, future and business development and all of these things if we're not considering disability? We just can't. It's also the only minority that is cross-sectional with race and gender and sexuality and all the other types of minorities. Disability can impact anyone, and I'm mortified and appalled that it's 2021 and we still have a broken caregiving system where I can't even have my basic needs met to get out of bed in the morning without going through extreme levels of stress and barriers because of the Medicaid problems. This is my basic need. I shouldn't have to face all of these issues with Medicaid. And then you look at public transportation and how I'm very fortunate to have a wheelchair accessible van, but so many individuals don't have transportation. Why are we not including that in the conversation? Why are we still having buildings that are not set up for inclusiveness? It's widespread. It's the only thing that affects everyone, disability in some way, shape, or form.
I agree. And the reality is there are other groups that there are intersectionalities, Black, women,
Yeah, Black and
LGBT, but I agree with you that disability just cuts across to everything, including the economics. And I agree with you about, because that's what we do with universal design and accessibility. And the good news about universal design and accessibility is it actually improves the experience for everybody else. We did the curb cuts, and certainly for people in wheelchairs, but it also benefited the rest of society. There are so many things that have been created for people with disabilities that has benefited the rest of society. But the reality is we're in these biological bodies that sometimes they don't see, it doesn't see as well. Sometimes we don't move as, it's just part of being human. And continuing to say that people with disabilities are broken or fragile or need to be is ridiculous. But at the same time, as you've pointed out very eloquently, we have programs that disable people. I know that during the COVID-19, multiple of my employees have caregiver needs. They need caregivers around the clock. And their caregiver, I know, just to pick on Lamondre, he got exposed to COVID twice by caregivers. And then in South Carolina, the caregivers appropriately were getting vaccinated, but they weren't vaccinating the people that needed the care, the Lamondres. So he went on television about it, and they actually changed the rule. And so now they're actually giving vaccine to the people that are being cared for. And also another thing, it is. Well, and another thing that we hope to do with this nonprofit is elevate some of these professions that are part of disabilities, like caregivers and job coaches. We pay these people horrible wages.
You can make more money in the fast food industry at McDonald's than you can caring for my medical needs in my home as an individual living with a life-threatening condition, muscular dystrophy. And yet, if I were to go to the hospital, I would have quality of life with nurses, but yet I want to be in my own home in the community, and yet I haven't had quality staff in this whole past year because people would rather stay on unemployment than work for $12 an hour in my home. It's just absolutely horrifying, the system. It's a broken system.
And that's in a developed country. Now you start getting into developing countries, and it gets much, much worse. You're born with a disability in certain countries, and it's because you did something wrong in a past life, or it's mind-boggling, the bigotry, the conscious and the unconscious bias. But anyway, we know that, and that's why we're all talking about all this. There's a lot to do, but I think it's very important, once again, to make sure that the community has a voice. And it can't always be from people that look like they don't have a disability, because I one time had somebody that has a disability. He's brilliant. And he said, Deborah, when you walk in the room, people might not know what the conversation's about. When I walk in the room, they know no matter what, disability's on the table. And I just thought that was such a powerful comment he made. And he's brilliant. He was born with cerebral palsy. But I just think that and everybody knows this, we're rethinking all of society. So as we rethink society, we need to really think about all these problems. So you're a professional, you have your own business, you're an entrepreneur, you're a speaker, you're a counselor, you're a coach, and you still can't get good caregivers, for example. And
I know, and it makes me passionate about talking about this, because if I can't do it, how can individuals who are physically unable to work because of a legitimate disability able to do it? How are we neglecting their basic needs? And one of the things that I really love about my job as a mental health therapist is we have to do the internal work that is necessary for us to feel like we deserve better. We have to do that internal work, because if we have internalized ableism or internalized ideas of I'm not a whole complete person, because I'm disabled, I don't deserve belonging. I guess I'm just not good enough. We're not going to have change in the world. We can't have those beliefs. Individuals with disabilities who feel like they're not a whole, complete person, or who feel that sense of inferiority because of their disability, I really urge them to work on that and to find a counselor who they really connect with and who really understands disability, because I think that's one of the basic things that we have to do first. We have to empower people with disabilities. I talk about empowerment all the time in my speaking and in all the workshops that I've done for people and organizations. We have to empower them. We have to uplift their voices. I love that you have this show, Deborah. I'm grateful to be here. You're part of that allyship in lifting up our voices and making this known that it's time to talk about these issues. It's time to talk about inclusiveness.
I agree. And representation matters. And we've got to be, even though I am a person with a disability under the definition, I have ADHD, but right now it's more important to focus on, I think representation matters. I'll just say that representation matters. So I know that we're out of time, but I want to do a couple more things before I let you go. One thing I would like to say, first of all, I want to ask you a question. I know during COVID-19, a lot of therapists started meeting with their clients virtually. So I'm curious, is that something you have started doing?
Yes, I have. It's really opened the door for a lot of clients with disabilities and without disabilities. Telehealth is convenient. You don't have to get a babysitter. You don't have to worry about transportation. You don't have to worry about any of that. You can do it from your home, in your pajamas, with your pets by you, with a blanket, on your cell phone, tablet, or computer. So I am available for that. And I love connecting with different people from all walks of life. I love connecting with organizations, and I'm really passionate about expanding my network.
All right, cool. So I was hoping you were going to say that. So first of all, if you're a person that's looking for a good counselor or a coach, because she also does coaching, Lauren is definitely a great resource. But I would also think that another thing, say that I was a therapist or I am an employer and I want to make sure that I'm supporting my team. Do you also provide support like that, like training to other therapists and doing projects? Because it's wonderful that you're here in Michigan. It's wonderful. And I know you've done global travel, but you actually have a lot of knowledge that you could teach a lot of other people, including, once again, we're hoping that we'll get you to help us with what we're doing. But I think we need to teach other people to be Laurens.
Absolutely. I love to do things on a national level. I am not limited to Michigan. In fact, that's one of my core values, is that I cannot operate in this bubble, because my voice and my messages and my knowledge needs to be carried out through other people in other settings and other states. I really want what I have to say and the knowledge and training that I have both in mental health and disability to be replicated among other therapists, other coaches, other nonprofit leaders, other entrepreneurs. And everything that we do, we should be talking about how this can be inclusive for all individuals, and that includes those with disabilities. And one more thing I like to say is, no one asked to have a disability. It's not something that you chose. It's not something that you wanted, but it is something that we have to accept and we have to manage. And that's part of life. We all have circumstances that we don't like sometimes, but that's what we have to do. We have to accept it, and we have to live the very best lives that we can. I think every individual is capable of living an extraordinary life, and people are much more disabled by society than they are by the actual condition that they live with. I am certainly much more disabled by society and misconceptions and policies and infrastructures than I am by muscular dystrophy. If muscular dystrophy was my only problem, my life would be so easy, because it would not be this hard.
But I do want to say one thing. But if somebody outside the United States wanted help, you're not just focused on the U.S. You would help others outside. Only because I know I have a lot of audience members outside the U.S. So I just want to make sure that I have you say, "Oh no, I'm open for everybody."
No, absolutely. open for everyone. I've actually already started some work with people in the UK, and that's been really exciting. I love to get that international perspective and share things. We are a global world. I think the pandemic has really shown us that more than ever, the world is interconnected, and with technology, there is absolutely no reason why we should be operating in silos. We need to connect with people globally.
I agree. I just wanted to say that in case some of the audience heard and thought, oh, she's on mute. Because no, she is definitely doing things global. So
absolutely.
Last but not least, I want you to tell the audience how they can get hold of you.
Absolutely. So my business is called River Oak Psychology. It's just very simple, www.riveroakpsychology.com. My email is also listed there. It's just Lauren, Lauren, at riveroakpsychology.com. It should be one of the first search results on Google. So Lauren Presutti, River Oak Psychology. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So you can find a lot of my work online. And I would love to just have a conversation, just talk about these things with me, how we can support each other. That's really my main mission and goal.
I agree. Lauren, I appreciate your work. When I heard about it, I was like, oh no, absolutely, you got to come on. I know the guests are backed up, so it takes a while to get on, but I really wanted to make sure that my audience knew about your work, and I will continue to support your work and pull you into what we're doing, but I just really wanted to celebrate what you're doing. So thank you for being on the show today, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a real honor, and I love the work that you're doing as well, Deborah.
It takes all of us, as you said. Bye, everyone.
You've been listening to Human Potential at Work, brought to you by Rue Global Impact. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you consume your audio. To learn more about Rue Global Impact and the services we provide, visit rueglobal.com. To learn more about how you can become a sponsor of Human Potential at Work, email David at rueglobal.com. That's David at rueglobal.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back next time with a new episode.